biggest call MVP has ever had. We're expecting maybe 200 people, and it looks like over 400 people have signed up. So I'm going to dive right into the housekeeping, and if you could click to the next slide, just walk through some reminders. So first of all, if you're not on video, if you're watching this, if you're on the phone, you're missing out. We have a whole bunch of amazing slides and a video coming. So I want to encourage people to get on video. It's not too late to invite folks. So go be donor organizers and, you know, let people know to get on. This is, it's not too late. It's going to be a great call. Oh, seeing Kirk Noden, one of the other co-visionaries of Win the Midwest from Ohio. So, and we want to encourage folks to use the chat and watch the chat. We're going to be doing Q&A at the end. We're going to be rounding up a lot of stuff from the chat. We also have a bunch of folks from the MVP team that can answer questions on the chat as you go. Again, this is part 1 of Win the Midwest. There's going to be a part 2 on May 5th at noon Central Time. Notice we're only giving it in Central Time, so you coastal people can figure out what time it is. And Midwest! Okay, so, and hey, there are, for those of you who are new to MVP, I think there are a lot of new people on this call. We're actually having a call next week called MVP 101, which is to just give you the basics on Movement Voter Project, because we're not going to do that on this call. We're going right into the advanced stuff. And we also have regular donor organizing calls for people who are like, I'm ready, put me in the game. I'm going to organize people. We have a calls for that to help you do that and support you do that. And if you're totally new to Movement Voter Project and someone just forwarded this to you, you can go to movement.vote. That's our website, and you can learn more there and share it with everyone you know. So finally, I just want to say thank you, and we really need you. And for those of you just joining, I'm Billy Wimsatt, the Executive Director of Movement Voter Project. And I'm just going to say a few words. It's really humbling. There are so many people to thank in this incredible team. Our state advisors, you're going to hear from Laura and Rima today, but we have dedicated state advisors on the ground in 10 of the most critical states, and we actually have pretty decent coverage of over 40 states where we fund organizing. And state advisors are really the heart of MVP. Yeah, that's it. They're the heart. I want to thank Elizabeth, our incredible communications director who designed this presentation right up to minutes before we went live, and Robbie and Shelby and Alex and Regina, who behind the scenes have been making this presentation work. I want to thank all our donors and donor partners. Together, we've moved close to 30 million so far this cycle. Woohoo! Over 5 million to Wisconsin alone. And when I say MVP moved it, I really mean that we collectively, you collectively moved $5 million to Wisconsin. You and we, the bigger we made that happen together. So just round of applause for everyone who has been pitching in to make these goals happen. Thank you all so much for making this possible. I want to shout out all our partners and friends in other progressive donor communities: Way to Win, Solid Air, Resource Generation, Threshold, Women Donors Network, Democracy Alliance, Airlift, Flip the Vote, Force Multiplier, and on and on. We love partnering with progressive donor communities, big and small, to move resources strategically. I want to thank all our donor organizers, MVP's 12 local teams who've organized over 120 house parties in person so far this cycle, and have already pivoted and are organizing lots of local digital house parties since the pandemic struck. And actually, we'll want to make sure, David Mendels, you're putting in the chat the information on the MVP 101s. And, you know, we really want to recruit you all to be part of this because it's a big, beautiful community that is growing. Just let us know. And I especially want to shout out our Chicago team who put so much work into organizing Win the Midwest. It was supposed to be a huge gathering in person today and tomorrow in Chicago. Huge shout out Jackie Kaplan Perkins and Rebecca and Saquon and Susan and Tuette and Charlene and the Hoopla team who put so much time and energy. It was going to be such a great conference. And we had an incredible list of speakers. A lot of you were planning to come. A bunch of you have had requested flights and signed up for flights and hotels. Hopefully everyone has received their refunds. If you haven't, let us know. Huge appreciation for this whole team for putting so much into this conference that we're now doing right now. So, but most importantly, I want to thank MVP's local partners who actually do the work to save us. Over 400 groups that we've partnered with in the past few years in over 40 states. And I want to just take a moment to give a standing ovation. I'm going to actually stand up myself to give a standing ovation for our Wisconsin partners on the call, our heroes. Can we all just like give them so much love for the work and all the hell that they've been through. And I want to really acknowledge, while we're celebrating and appreciating them, the organizers in Wisconsin have been through an incredibly traumatizing experience. And while the behavior of Republicans has been utterly beyond the pale, Governor Evers' leadership was too little too late as well. I think we have to acknowledge that. Groups were begging him for weeks to move this election. And I really just want to acknowledge all of you in Wisconsin, your heroism and the trauma you're going through, and the way that you're even taking time to show up in this call is taking you away from the communities that need you so much, and the way that the virus is ravaging, especially Black and Brown communities, and the intense level of grief and pain you all are going through and caring right now. Just want to like stop and just take a moment of silence to just acknowledge you all and everyone you're connected to and everything that they're holding right now. Thank you. And I know that everyone on this call is experiencing this, and some of you are dealing with your own intense grief and pain and terror right now. Just want to acknowledge all of you. Thank you for being on this call. Thank you for being with us. And we're going to get through this together and make our country better. And Wisconsin's going to play a big role in that, a starring role, perhaps. So we're incredibly honored to have our dream team from Wisconsin today, Angela, Dakota, Fabi, and Chai. We just owe you all a huge debt of gratitude for your heroic work and all the dangerous and awful things that you had to go through to save your state and to save our country. I don't have to tell you all that Wisconsin is likely to be one of the swingiest of all the swing states this fall. Real talk, all of our fates and survival are in the hands of the organizers you're going to hear from today. We have to support them in any way we possibly can. And part of what we learned in this election is that has to start very, very early with getting people registered, IDs, getting people signed up for absentee ballots, dealing with all the horrible, confusing things that are going to come at them. We have to make sure, just like we're making sure our doctors and our nurses and our people in the front lines have the supplies they need, we need to make sure our organizers in the battleground states have the supplies that they need to organize their communities and to save all of us. So we have to, there's a huge amount that has to happen. We have to start early, and with winning, this election, we got kind of lucky. The Republicans were caught flat-footed, and they're taking this as a huge wake-up call and doubling down on their Wisconsin strategy. We need to double down on our Wisconsin strategy and that of all these battleground states. Our current estimate is Wisconsin is going to need somewhere in the neighborhood of 40 to 50 million to win on the independent side. That's not even the party and the candidates or anything else. Those need to be funded too. But on the independent side alone, C3s, C4s, and things independent of the party, it's going to be, 40 to 50 million. And right now, most of that is a gap, tens of millions of dollars of gap. So we have to give big. We have to give early. We have to get everyone we know to give and become evangelists to get people the resources they need so badly. So that when we're at home on November 3rd, watching the numbers come in, refreshing our screens anxiously over and over again, we have no regrets. And that for the next 4 years, every day we have no regrets. And for the rest of our lives, and the impact on Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the Supreme Court and climate and everything that will be with us for the rest of our lives based on what we do in these next few months, we have no regrets. So I'm going to pass it to my colleague, Laura Flynn, the state advisor from Minnesota. And she's going to pass it to Rima, our Wisconsin state advisor, who will introduce our Wisconsin partners. Thank you very much, Laura.
Hey, everyone. Can you all hear me? Hope so. Okay, great. So I'm just going to give a little brief overview of what we were thinking about in terms of why we need to win the Midwest and kind of the overall strategy before we go to the headline news from Wisconsin. First off is, and this really came from, this strategy really emerged from partners on the ground in Midwestern states, particularly during transit, Faith in Minnesota, some folks in Ohio, Michigan, and the underlying story is that these states that are outlined on this slide in front of you have been voting in tandem for the past 50 years. So this is not like a 2018 or 2020 cycle. This is like a generational cycle. And the states have been swinging like a hinge and pulling the entire country along with them. So Minnesota tends to be the bluest piece of this hinge, with Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, the reddest piece. And so in a bad year, Minnesota is really, really close, like it was in 2016 when Trump only lost Minnesota by 1.5 points, 1.5%. And Ohio and Pennsylvania go really, and Western Pennsylvania go really, really red. And so our thinking about this was, is there a way to use some of the bluer energy in this hinge to pull the whole region together, which would then also pull the entire country in a better direction. So that's first of all how we kind of were thinking about the states that matter. And then beyond that, we all know that Trump won by 77,000 votes in 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And out of that, there's been like a whole huge national conversation that emerged after 2016 about particularly focused on so-called swing voters in those 3 states and the industrial Midwest and how to win them back. And all the imagery and talk was really about, came down to really white working class voters, and particularly it focused on white men, white working class male voters, and this sort of image of, you know, the Rust Belt or out of work steel workers. And those of us living here were saying, well, that is a very tiny portion of the population of our states. And some of us, Billy and me and Doran, a couple of other people, were at a Way to Win conference in 2017, 2018, and hearing their vision of how we could transform our entire country. If we can transform the entire electoral map if we focus on southern states that have these amazing, young, emerging, multiracial electorates, like in Florida and Texas and Arizona. And we were sitting there saying, well, actually, we have those electorates in our states as well. We don't have quite the numbers, but we also don't have the same margin to make up. Like, we're actually very close to winning in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. And we have that same emerging coalition. So I think if we could go to the next slide. Great, so we have winning coalitions emerging in all of these states. In Michigan, Minnesota, Ohio, and Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, there are enough of this kind of rainbow of groups to come together to win, and in Iowa and Missouri, enough to be competitive. And there are critical elections at stake in each of these states. So, and those coalitions don't look the same in each state. Like here in Minnesota, our coalition depends a lot on new immigrants from the Horn of Africa, Somali, Eritrean, and then also we have a really large Hmong population. In Wisconsin, as you're going to hear, it's a different set of groups that we need to pull together. But across the board, it depends heavily on African American voters, Latinx and APIA, Asian American voters, youth, students, suburban women, Jews and Muslims, LGBTQ and larger community, plus progressive white voters, male and female, especially single women tend to be a really large pool of our voters. So we have that coalition. We know that we can win. We're working on putting it together in all of these states. We wanted to be in Chicago today. We had been planning for a year to really showcase that coalition and to show the work that's already been done, to show where a whole new generation of state and local leaders have already been elected coming out of these communities in Minneapolis, in Chicago, in Detroit, in Milwaukee. And right now, those leaders are the ones really leading the way on progressive policy in response to COVID. So that's been another like huge piece of our story here, is that they're the ones calling for eviction and foreclosure moratoriums, added support for undocumented people within cities and states, all kinds of cutting edge work that wouldn't be happening if those folks hadn't been elected over the last 4 or 5 years. So we couldn't be in Chicago. We are together today. We're hoping to still be able to center our region and our states. And we're going to do this other call, as Billy said, on May 5th to do a deeper dive into what the numbers look like and what those coalitions are going to look like in each of the states that we're talking about. But we wanted to give the bulk of this call over to Wisconsin, who just pulled a win out from the darkest moment, perhaps in electoral history. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Rima, our state advisor from Wisconsin.
Thanks so much, Laura. Hey, everyone. Hopefully folks can hear me. I don't see any confused looks, so I'm assuming that you all can. Yes, again, my name is Rima Ahmed. I'm the Wisconsin State Advisor. I also run our Muslim Voter Project. And, you know, the truth is the last few weeks, especially the last month more generally, have been surreal. And I think as I was preparing for this call, I wanted to lay out in the same spirit of Win the Midwest and everything you just covered, Laura, this idea of how do we get back to a progressive 2020s in the Midwest. And yet I have to honor the fact that we'll be hearing from some of our partners and leaders in a little bit on this call, that folks are really hurting out here. Yes, we won. We won last week. We won in the Supreme Court. We won in Milwaukee, the city of Milwaukee, around a public schools funding referendum at the county levels, city levels. And yet a tension that a lot of us are still holding is at what cost? We won, and those were important races, and at what cost? So just holding that right now, and appreciate you all joining us for this conversation on Wisconsin. But I will step back a little bit and just want to look at Wisconsin as a whole and take a few minutes before we transfer it over to these groups to share, just to better understand what is the story of Wisconsin, what is the context in our state. And if you want to go to the next slide, thank you. So Wisconsin as a, what is the background? And, some may not realize this, but Wisconsin at its core, or my Wisconsin, is a progressive state. For my part, what it means to be from Wisconsin will always be linked to our former Senator Russ Feingold. His election, his 2004 election, was the first that I ever actively volunteered on. I still remember holding up a banner for him at several 4th of July parades around Southeast Wisconsin. And the reason why he stands out to me is because in the scary and uncertain days and weeks following the 9/11 attacks, when communities like my own were under a spotlight and being targeted, profiled, he was the only senator across the country to vote against the Patriot Act, and seemingly the only one to have the foresight not to trample on our hard-fought for civil liberties. In my eyes, he was not going to throw our communities under the bus. And I kept on thinking, wow, how very Wisconsin of him. And so as we think about that, I like to ground myself in that, because I think the last 10 years would lead us to believe that Wisconsin is only ever this conservative laboratory. And indeed it has been. The Tea Party wave in 2020 brought in Scott Walker, brought in Republican leadership in our state legislature, and it happened at such an opportune time, right? 2010, it was right before we went into redistricting. It doesn't take a historian to see how the last 10 years have played out. 2011 redistricting happened. We are one of the most gerrymandered states, if not the most gerrymandered state in the country. And conservatives have really solidified their control over the last 10 years. And yet, as I'm saying this and thinking about this, it still is hard to believe that the leadership in this state, the conservative and Republican leadership state in the state, would allow for an election to happen during the worst public health crisis of our lives. You know, even as I say all of this, it really does take sinking to a new, previously unfathomable low to hold an election at this time and risk the lives of folks all across Wisconsin. If you want to go, oh, we're already on that slide. Great. So this brings us to today, or more generally speaking, the last couple years. You all know some of these numbers. In 2016, Wisconsin voted for a Republican president for the first time in my lifetime, over 30 years. And we lost the state by just under 23,000 votes. 2 years later, 2018, we won the governorship, finally ousting Scott Walker, but the Republican-controlled state legislature gutted the incoming governor's powers during a lame duck session only weeks after the election. And then 2019 came along, right? And grassroots groups in the beginning of 2019 lost the biggest civic engagement funder in the state. We're talking about $3 to $4 million that and this was the BRICO fund, that $3 to $4 million that was previously going to civic engagement, grassroots organizing across the state, that was no longer there. And only a few months after that, April 2019, we lost a Wisconsin Supreme Court race by less than 6,000 votes. And I go into the nitty-gritty details of this because this is important to understand the moment we're in right now. That loss last year has come back to haunt us earlier this year when the Wisconsin Supreme Court made the decision and forced this election moving forward. So what were some of the other things that we did during this time? I'm really proud to say that MVP stepped up. You all were part of this. We moved $5 million to grassroots groups in the last 16 months. And this was previously unheard of for a quote unquote off year for this level of investment to be made. But we knew that if groups and communities were going to show up in this year, in 2020, that they couldn't afford to let go of the leaders that they had spent the previous cycle building up, that they needed to continue to build up those leaders, invest in the communities, and bring us to a better place for this year. And so that brings me to what has happened in the last month, if you will. So the whole ecosystem across our state has been preparing for April 2020 since at least last summer. And I can't emphasize enough, like as groups were getting ready to, ramping up their field, even though some of the partners on our call here were already knocking on doors end of January, beginning of February. For the most part, campaigns and groups were preparing, ramping up in this last month before the election, that this is really when the pandemic hit us and became more real. I've got a timeline here for folks on the video, you can kind of see in some of these key dates. But what I want you all to understand from this timeline is not so much like how many times the target changed, because the target did change. It went from online voter registration ending on March 18th to, thank goodness, being extended until March 30th. But then we had early voting sites that were open for the last 2 weeks, or were supposed to be open for the last 2 weeks of March, that ended up having to close because of poll workers and because of more fears around COVID, right? But what I want you all to understand is the ways that groups had to pivot over and over and over again, while us, just like the rest of the country, we're dealing with a situation we've never before experienced, right? Having to bring our children home from schools, having to ensure that staff had what they needed, the computers, the cell phones, the data plans to be able to work from home, all while having an election. And so, yeah, this timeline really just gives a small insight into the types of changes that groups had to do, moving their canvassers to doing lit drops so that they don't interact with voters at the doors, to then learning different phone banking and text banking apps, to changing up the scripts, to keeping up with the level of changes in information around this election. Even as I say this, I can see how this could come off as like over and over again, a pace that can get very confusing, but this is exactly what the voters and our communities in the state had to deal with. not really knowing, okay, is this election going to be moving forward? Can I actually vote on election day? Will my ballot be accepted if I submit it after 8 p.m. on April 7th? And now if we can go to like some of the next slides, election day. By now, many of you have probably seen what election day looked like. We had lines that were spanning blocks at the poll sites. Folks were waiting for upwards of 2 hours. It was actually a pretty nice day, except in the middle of it when it started to rain. But all of this was so folks could cast a ballot. Young people, elderly folks, folks wearing masks, carrying signs. For my part, I actually drove to some of these polling sites to check on the location of absentee ballot boxes. I was volunteering with my local Muslim community to pick up ballots from folks who didn't feel safe leaving their homes, but still wanted to make sure they got their ballots in to vote. And as I was going to these different different polling sites, I had a sinking feeling in my stomach. When you see folks standing in line when we have a pandemic, the only thought that was running through my mind at that time was, which of these people are going to get sick? Who is going to pass away simply because they wanted to exercise their right and their responsibility to vote? So, sorry, because we don't know. We don't know yet what is going to be the full human toll of this election. Gosh, with that, actually, if you want to go to the next slide, folks have heard this too. We had record-breaking absentee voting. Absentee voting is not something folks in our state typically actually do. Less than a quarter of voters typically vote absentee, and we had over 1.2 million ballots that were mailed out, and then over 1 million ballots that were received and returned. So truly, folks stepped up in a way and voted in a way that they were not used to. And this is entirely due to the efforts of grassroots groups like the folks we're going to be hearing on this call. But the truth is, actually, there were so many groups that were doing this work, and we only have an hour to be able to share some of these stories. So if you go to the next slide, I want to give some shine and shout out to the very many partners all across the state that were doing work in this cycle, continue to do work all across the state. We've got over 40 partners, groups in Wisconsin. We're talking about groups like Progress North up in Superior, CS in La Crosse, Maniconicum in Northeast Wisconsin, and Blue Sky Waukesha and the WOW counties. MVP partners are connecting with voters and communities in every single one of Wisconsin's 72 counties. So many props to them. Not everyone could speak. You can learn more about them on MVP's website, but want to make sure that y'all know that there are so many groups out here doing really, really critical and amazing work. With that, I just want to remind us again that it has taken us 10 years to get to this point. 10 years of deep Republican investments, strategizing, and focus. And it will take another 10 years for us to turn things around and make the 2020s a progressive decade in Wisconsin and across the Midwest. I'm so grateful and excited to say that this work is already happening. Today, we're going to hear again from some of the groups leading change across our state, telling their stories, sharing in their own words what has been happening on the ground and what communities need to continue supporting one another and building together this year and beyond. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to Angela Lang with Black Leaders Organizing for Communities. Some of y'all maybe have heard of Block or heard of Angela. If you maybe read about their work in the New York Times, the Atlantic, the Washington Post. So many outlets are covering the amazing work that Angela and the folks at Block are doing. And I just want to emphasize that Angela is one of those leaders who keeps it real. And everything you're reading about this organization, the work they're doing is true. And we have got just such a credible and community-focused leader. And Angela, really, really grateful to have you both on this call and in our state, and want to pass it on to you to share a little bit more on what you've been experiencing and the work that you all have been doing with Block during this time.
Thanks, Rima. Thank you for the kind words. It's been a really interesting time to say the least. A little bit about Block for those that haven't heard is Block was formed at the end of November 2017. We wanted to make sure that we weren't waiting for a candidate or elected officials, or quite frankly, even a party to wait to talk to our communities. We heard the vote margins, we heard how narrow it was, and people were blaming Black voters. We were not engaged, we weren't being talked to. When we started to knock doors in the cold November 2017, people were like, I've lived here for 5-6 years, and this is the first time someone has talked to me and knocked on my door. And so we wanted to make sure that we were a year-round civic engagement organization. One question that we hold very dear to us, whether we're doing partisan work or nonpartisan work, is always asking folks the question and leading with this question: what does it look like for the Black community to thrive? And a lot of times people hadn't even thought about what it meant to thrive. People, when people finally did, have an answer for that, people were like, well, we need a speed bump, or, these potholes are awful. And I think that really put into context that people are literally just trying to sustain and live day by day, and aren't even thinking about what it means to have a thriving, full community. And so flash forward, we've been knocking on doors since November of 2017. We essentially haven't stopped outside of some holiday breaks here and there. We wanted to make sure we were not an organization that's just popping up like a lot of others. Thank goodness none on this call, but like a lot of other organizations that we know who just knock on your door and just try to extract as much information and votes as possible, but aren't really invested in people. And so our field program consists of our ambassadors. We don't call them canvassers. We really do believe that they are the face of the organization. They are the backbone of the organization. You see some of them here. And we really are intentional about leadership development. So our ambassadors, when I talk about ambassadors are canvassers. They do canvassing work, but we're so wholly dedicated to their own leadership development. And so we were able to take a group of ambassadors and raise them to lead ambassadors. So they're now leading a team of ambassadors and guiding them through based off of their experience. And so, flash forward to the beginning of this year, we were able to, we started with 33 ambassadors, which was a really good start. And right before everything hit in February, we added 17 more. We knew that we wanted to have 50 ambassadors leading up to the April election, knocking doors, making sure people understood the roles and responsibilities. We don't always just knock straight for candidates. It's saying, hey, do you know that there's a referendum on the ballot? Do you know what that, what all of that means? Do you know that there's a state Supreme Court race? Do you know what the state Supreme Court does? Do you know that they're 10-year terms? Do you know what type of cases go in front of them? So doing some of that education on doors has been really, really crucial. And instead of, just knocking, for candidates, we want to make sure that everybody knows the roles and responsibilities of these offices, because we feel if people actually know that, and we're not leading necessarily with candidates, then people feel more engaged. And so our ambassadors, they're put through rigorous training before they're even allowed to knock doors. And so we put our people through roughly 30 hours of training around basic civics, how civic or levels of government work, who are the candidates, but just kind of the broader sense of how to get involved and engaged. And so just to take a step back about what April 7th election meant, there's folks and there's organizations, some are on this call and some aren't, who have been sounding the alarm. And I think it's worth uplifting and noting what Rima alluded to, is that Black and Brown organizations were calling on this election to be postponed. We knew that, and we saw the statistics. I think people are just now starting to have conversations now about how it's impacting Black and Brown communities, but disproportionately. But we knew it long before people were talking about it. And it was stressful. We made the decision on March 17th that we were going to shut down our office beginning March 18th. So we had about 48 hours to completely revamp our program, to do texting and phone banking and making sure that we were engaging our folks. And we had to balance that, knowing that we couldn't just come in and text people about the election. We needed to do wellness checks. And so, keeping with this idea that we are not going to be transactional, we're not going to just extract and only talk about voting. We care about our community. We built a strong sense of community, not just within our office and our team, but amongst the broader community. And we've heard horror stories. As the elections were starting to come in earlier this week, one of our lead ambassadors put in the group chat to pray for her family because she had lost her uncle due to the coronavirus. And we see our own team members that are, they're calling me because they need to vent because they're feeling increased anxiety and stress and depression with how close this is getting to them. And, our team, and I'm sure a lot of other partners can testify that our team moves mountains just in order to come to work every day in order to reach our community. And so to add this global pandemic has been gut-wrenching. To do electoral organizing in the midst of having people experience trauma in real time, it's heartbreaking and devastating. And Wisconsin, as Rima was talking about, has always been unique. We've been constantly fighting this fight for 10 years plus. It's always been a constant fight. And Black and brown people have, quite frankly, always led the way to saving democracy. And while the election went the way that we wanted it to, we also know that it was hard. It's not something I have even celebrated. People were crying tears of joy hearing speeches from the winning candidates, and I was just numb, and I still am, knowing that people are going to get sick in a couple weeks, and they've had to make this choice from making their voice heard or choosing their health. That is not a choice that anyone should have to make in a healthy democracy. So the last thing I'll say is, we did have this win. Whatever winning is, we were able to have that referendum for our Milwaukee Public Schools that was passed. We were able to, get that state Supreme Court candidate win. But we know that there's a long way to go. We know that we need to put systems in place and safeguards where people feel confident in whatever the deadlines are. The deadlines aren't changing back and forth by the hour. People are able to have a plan and plan accordingly. And this is the plan, and we're sticking to it. We saw voter suppression in multiple forms in this election, and it's important for us to have confidence and to restore the confidence and the faith that people's ballots are going to be actually mailed to them, and they're going to be mailed back. And we also know that we spooked the Republican Party. They're spooked. They're going to dump in a lot of money. And so this is, as Billy mentioned, this is a time for us to double down on our efforts and really support Black and brown communities who we all are knowing, in the state of Wisconsin are going to be the demographic to actually, flip the election and what the election outcome will be in November. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Angela. I want to introduce a next partner, Dakota Hall with LIT. And as Angela said, Dakota and LIT were probably the first group to really sound the alarm and say, hey, this election really should not be going forward, and began organizing fellow advocates and other grassroots groups to call on the administration and other leaders to postpone this election. So very grateful for Dakota keeping it real and just being super unapologetic in this work around the communities that y'all are serving. So Dakota, why don't you take it away?
Thank you. Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon for those not on the West Coast. My name is Dakota Hall. I proudly serve as the Executive Director of Leaders Igniting Transformation. We're based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, the city with the best coast, the fresh coast. Like to always throw that in there and remind people that the Great Lakes are great. So we can go to the next slide. People don't need to see my face that much. So leading up to the election and the pre-COVID-19, our organization was going through a really big transformational change. A little pun on our name there too, if you caught that. We are in the process, and we still are going to, and we have expanded to a statewide organization. So we're no longer just working in the city of Milwaukee. We're working in communities like Green Bay, Oshkosh, Stevens Point, Menominee, La Crosse, Eau Claire. In order to do that, we made a really big investment in our organization. We staffed up to 16 full-time staff throughout Wisconsin, hiring people as well in these different communities, and building a powerful and robust organization that is mobilizing young people in high schools, colleges, as well as in communities of color to mobilize around issues and elections and do that in tandem and not separately of each other. Our plans for this election were to organize on 14 high schools, 9 campuses, and as well as in communities of color. That looked like us knocking 50,000 doors in Milwaukee alone, doing the organizing on campuses, recruiting students to go out and vote, doing all the fun stuff that we normally do, and we were not able to do due to the situation with COVID. As well as we planned, and we did execute creating original content with a lot of dope artists in the city of Milwaukee, and really bring our cultural organizing to the forefront, and show how we can engage communities of color and young people who are otherwise pushed to the margins, not reached by traditional voter contact methods of a door knock, and really bring folks into a civic engagement world that centered and leaned on the culture that in which we all grew up on, that could not put a price on. Leaning into Black culture, leaning into Latinx culture, leading into Indigenous culture, and really making a space and political home for young people who have been left out the political process. We can go to the next slide. And so all that was like going on and being, and that energy and that aura and the frequency and the vibes were in here, and until we reached, the closure of everything that happened. We know on March 11th, I myself was at University of La Crosse meeting with students, with our college director. And all of a sudden, all this news starts breaking out that, hey, we're canceling classes after spring break, and students were to be sent home. And that really made, for us, really gave us that motivation to ring the alarm and said, hey, this election, we can't do it. Students will not be able to participate. This is going to be massive confusion. The next day after that, Tony Evers closed all K through 12, and we're just like, hey, no, you need to listen to us. This is going to end badly. And that all kind of like led up. And I think we were the first group, to really call on Evers and say, hey, postpone this election, because we know that if we lead down this current trajectory, everything that comes out from the CDC and other public health experts, this will be disastrous for communities of color. Leading up to the election, my home county, Milwaukee County, had about 28% Black population, but nearly 80% of the deaths in our county were Black folks. So we know it was disproportionately impacting Black people at a level that was just unbelievable. And so that led us to walking into the pandemic primary, in which we're calling it, knowing that we're going to risk the lives of individuals. I think we can go to the next slide. I think that's our video as well too, that will help articulate some of our work as well too, better than I can.
In fact, it was still held during a global pandemic in which thousands of people lost their lives. The delayed action by Governor Evers, combined with the Republican leadership enforcing voters to the polls during this pandemic, undoubtedly put thousands of people at risk of contracting coronavirus. Yes, we are angry about the tens of thousands of disfranchised voters of color, but we are more angry at the political leaders who turned this from an election to an execution. In response to the coronavirus, we pivoted to a digital-first organization to protect the safety of our staff and members. While we have always incorporated digital organizing into our work, we are an on-the-ground organization at heart. Every day we build with and for the people of Wisconsin in 14 high schools, 9 college campuses, and in communities of color. It was not easy, but we were able to transform our organization in a matter of days to still engage with the young people and the communities of color throughout Wisconsin. Our impact on digital platforms led to our content being seen over 2.3 million times on different social media platforms. Our content reaching almost 891,000 people in Wisconsin. Our content directing 19,000 people to request an absentee ballot. Videos watched 330,000 times advocating people to vote yes for NPS and how to request an absentee ballot. Our digital impact was backed up by our canvassing team and staff, switching to peer-to-peer texting and call campaigns that saw us send over 360,000 text messages to Wisconsin voters and made 25,000 calls to vote, reminding voters to return their ballots. And we sent another 130,000 specifically to college voters. Regardless of who the winners are tonight, the real winners is Wisconsin's future. Because in some of our darkest moments, young people of color stepped up and showed they have the leadership to move this state forward.
Yeah, so that is our election recap video that really, I think, highlights, one, the imagery of what folks and especially people of color had to go through to get there and get through that election, but also talked about some of the work and how we were really able to overcome that and be a critical part of getting that really to be solidified. So when we think about what we're doing, moving forward, we can go to the next slide after this. Is after the, we're over the election that, in my opinion, should have never have happened, should have been delayed, but now we're moving forward. And so what that looks like for LIT, that looks like we're taking our signature summer program, Black Hogwarts, digitally. Black Hogwarts digital action training and organizing. And so we're doing a bunch of different trainings online for young people throughout the state of Wisconsin, and really making sure that they are activated and engaged still, and doing that critical civic education for young people, as well as getting them motivated for the fall election. We're doing massive voter registration on the C3 and C4 side, using new digital tools being developed by some partners, as well as developing our own tool to really be creative in how we're engaging young people around voter registration. We have a goal this year of registering 15,000 young people of color throughout the state of Wisconsin in terms of helping build that electorate up for that way we can get victory in November. We plan on doing some advanced digital organizing tactics and tools, developing our own bots, finding different ways and to engage young people digitally through new tools that are coming out, and finding ways that really propel them into some leadership digitally. We're going to be working on the census, making sure that young people and communities of color are being marked and making sure that we're not losing our representation. When we look at something like Congress and even locally, we know that Congress is majority white and it's not representative of the current demographic in America. And so how do we shift that is working with young people of color and building that into them around being counted and making sure that our representation reflects our communities. As well as we're going to be gearing up to prepare some for local budget fights. We know the coronavirus is going to have an impact on tax revenue. And we know that what's likely to be the first hit when it comes to cutting local budgets is services for communities of color. And we are going to make a stand that will not be acceptable, that we will not, in a moment in which we are being devastated by a virus, see services in our neighborhood cut. And we will step up to the plate and make sure that our communities are protected. And so that's all I have. And thank you very much, MVP, for allowing me to share, and definitely appreciate all the support that we've been given.
Thanks so much, Dakota. Always appreciate you all so much. Our next speaker is Fabi Maldonado with VOCIS. Some of y'all probably know VOCIS's executive director, Christine, but Fabi as the political director is one of the secret forces, if you will, that's really ensuring that the relational organizing program that VOCIS runs, that gets national attention for just how well it is, how well they employ relational organizing. Fabi makes sure that those voceros all across the state are building out their networks, connecting with their family, their friends, and really building power at the pace of relationships. So thank you so much, Fabi, for joining our call, and please take it away.
Thank you so much, Rima. And thank you everybody for letting me be here in this space with y'all. And I'm very grateful for Dakota and Angela and everybody else who's been working really hard in this very difficult time. So as Rima said, Voz de la Frontera Action, we're an immigrant and labor organization. We deal with a lot of a lot of people in the immigrant community, and we try to help folks who have who struggle if they're undocumented have legal representation. We have a legal clinic in our organization, and to talk about a little bit about our voter relational program, our Voceros program, our main buckets, we're trying to focus in Latinx, multiracial youth, and pro-immigrant rural supporters. And we're essentially trying to target in 5 key regions in our areas that have the highest Latinx population, 4 times the average in the state of Wisconsin. So that included Milwaukee County, Racine County, Waukesha County, Brown County, and Dane County. And we were really trying to activate as many people as we could by phone. We originally had this big canvas operation and complementing it with the RVP, but all that had to change in mid-March, and we did a quick pivot. And I'm sure Dakota and Angela can have similar stories, but it was a really strong, tough grind that we had to do for like at least 3 weeks. I was working like 12, 15 hours just to make sure that our programs were running strong, because a lot of the people that we deal with, a lot of the immigrant community, they're not tech savvy. So we have to it takes longer to walk folks through the process over the phone, which is already challenging in itself. But we did manage to transform that, and to transition into a digital platform. We had a phone banking team, and obviously we're pushing for the election, but we started most of our conversations with a survey, just asking folks, hey, how are you managing right now in this this time where we have the virus? The folks are losing their jobs. They don't have no more transportation. In the immigrant community, transportation is a big issue because we don't have driver's license here, and so it was for a lot of people who are high risk. They couldn't work. They're losing their jobs. So we were documenting as many stories as we can. And one of the stories that I really want to highlight, one of our phone bankers, Ignacio, he called. He had a conversation with this woman, and we were asking her all the questions, how she's dealing with COVID-19. This woman lost her job, and she didn't have any more insulin, and Ignacio, unbeknownst to us, drove to her house and gave her a month's worth of supply of insulin. And for us, it's definitely more than voting, because this is a lot of our people. They're losing their jobs, and we had to create an emergency fund for the undocumented community. And essentially, we're asking folks, if you don't need the $1,000 stimulus check, to please donate it to these emergency funds, so we could help folks who are undocumented, who cannot ask for help, or can't get help, or can't pay their rents, or can't pay their bills or medication. But yeah, we really focus. We really focus on our RVP, our relational voter program. We had about 1,400 engagements, and from those 1,400, we had about almost 1,100. So we had like close to a 71% positive contact rate, compared to the phone banks that we've done in the past that are around 12 to 13% contact rate, positive contacts. But yeah, we had other challenges as well. As Rima said earlier, there was a challenge of the misinformation. A lot of folks that we were calling to didn't know that the election was happening. They thought it was canceled. So we had to walk a lot of folks through that process as well. I know Voces, we joined a couple of lawsuits to try to postpone the election. We were also strongly advocating for the election to be postponed. I know the executive director, Christine Newman Ortiz, called on the day of the election early in the morning, 6 a.m., to have a caravan protest around the secretary of the health secretary. We're asking that person to please call off the election because it was an emergency and folks are going to be losing their lives. But yeah, we at Voces, we felt that even throughout that, we still ran a pretty strong electoral campaign. We have a youth chapter. We had the youth really stepped up in our yes chapters, the youth empowered in the struggle. We had about 20 phone bankers, RVP phone bankers, or Vocero phone bankers in Racine, and we had like another 20 in Milwaukee. And these high school kids were calling their friends, their family, people that they knew to please go out and vote, and they really helped us deliver this win. I know in Racine, for example, we had similar to what was going on in Milwaukee. There is a referenda for building up our schools, rebuilding our schools, and the referenda passed by 5 votes in Racine. It was really close. And there was a couple of elections too that we were able to help that were pretty strong that we won. Edwin Santiago in Racine became the first Latinx progressive elected to the Common Council, and we helped Joe Casas Amaripa, who is a Latina LGBTQ, win her aldermanic seat. But yeah, it was a very tough time for us at Voces, and our community right now. We're still calling people. We haven't really stopped. We're still phone banking. We're still asking folks what do they need, how can we help them in this time, and the fund. We're still trying to build the fund, and that's what we're mostly focusing on right now is building that fund, and also working on census work, telling folks to get counted. That's another thing that we're doing, but mostly was an emphasis of highlighting the resources that they need. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Fabi. I think a common thread that we're hearing from all of you all, and that we're going to hear from the next speaker as well, is that at the same time that groups were doing the rapid response education to ever-changing election, we were also needing to meet the human needs of the communities that we serve. Thank you so much for all that y'all have done. Our next speaker, Chai, with the Freedom Inc. Community Power Coalition, is an elected leader in Portage County. Really appreciate your leadership, Chai, on this. And I know that you all work with social service agencies all across the state. So also experienced in real time the way that community needs overlapped with all the information and the changing dynamics around this election. At the same time that let's not pretend that what Trump has been doing and the way that he's been framing this pandemic has been also disproportionately impacting API, Asian American communities. And we've seen that folks, and whether we're talking about our partners in Milwaukee or partners in other parts of the state, have had to increase their security because they're afraid for their Asian American communities. And so I want to just give a nod that I know that you all have been holding a lot of that, and give you all space to share a little bit more.
All right, thanks, Rima. Hi, everyone. This is Chai Moore. I am with Freedom Inc., Freedom Action Now. I am the FI Community Power Coalition Director here at Freedom Inc. My pronouns, I go by she, her, hers. Wisconsin, API communities in Wisconsin has never been invested in the past to do civic engagement work. And folks actually, folks did see as part, our API communities as part of electoral power. So Freedom Inc. And the Freedom Inc., the Freedom Community Power Coalition It's actually the first coalition to build on Black and Southeast Asian solidarity and do that throughout the state and reach communities where predominantly we have a lot of APIs. And when we talk about APIs in Wisconsin, we're talking a lot about Hmong folks because we are the largest group of APIs in Wisconsin. So we work with service providers throughout the state of Wisconsin. We actually sub-grant to them to make sure the organizations are strong, because we know that regardless what kind of what kind of political power, whoever comes into office, that we actually have to build up strong organizations within our communities to combat all of that. So we actually, we grant out and provide organizational development and technical assistance to all of our organizations throughout the state to help build the organizations to be strong, to help build their service components and their community power components to be strong enough to withstand whoever comes into office. And, you know, to be honest, like, I think for all communities of color, we've known regardless who comes into office, as progressive as they may be, our communities still suffer, and we have to be prepared for that and get our organizations prepared for that. And so we have organizations through, like in Eau Claire, La Crosse, Stevens Point, Wausau, Appleton, Milwaukee. A lot of these organizations currently provide domestic violence and sexual assault services. So they're providing services to some of the most vulnerable populations, and also many population individuals who are fleeing for safety or who are currently looking for safety. And we're working with individuals who folks would never engage in when they think about civic engagement, or when they think about being able to build political power. And so our theory of change at Freedom Inc. really is, folks come to us, we have to take care of their immediate needs in the crisis, or help them with that before we can even start talking to them about building community power. And as you can see through this pandemic, we actually had to make sure, although all of our staff was working remotely, we made sure our food pantry was still running. And not just running, but we had to make sure our food pantry was giving out adequate cultural specific foods that our Black and Hmong and Khmer communities would actually be able to use. And so when I think about like the work in the last month, it really has, like, our voters were going out and risking their lives, and so were our community power builders, because our community power builders were also risking their lives to make sure that whoever chooses to vote was going to be able to do so, and whoever didn't could actually still feed their families, or find other ways to make sure that their families were safe. And so since we have partners throughout the whole state, during this time, we, our Milwaukee partners were concentrating everything that was happening in Milwaukee, but we also said, you know what, let's do what we can do throughout the state and other parts of the state to make sure that we're turning out as many folks in other communities out to vote too, because we know that voting in where I live in Stevens Point looked very different from what voting looked like in Milwaukee and Madison. And we had to think about where else could we have influence in, because we had great partners such as Lit and Black in Milwaukee and VOSAs in Milwaukee do this work. What other parts of the state can we influence? And so we held a day-long virtual statewide phone bank. We called Hmong, Southeast Asian, and Black families outside of the Madison, Milwaukee area. And some of the responses we were getting from these folks were, "Oh, thank you for calling me. No one's ever called me." Or even for those who didn't speak English, to hear a bilingual person on the other side of the line in small communities such as like Chippewa Falls, where they didn't think a Hmong person would ever call them to say, "Hey, are you planning to vote?" And we were seeing that we were actually spending a lot more time on our calls, because we actually had to educate our communities about what an absentee ballot was. this was something very new to our communities. We had to really tell them what it was, walk through that process of how to request for one, but not just that, calling back and going through the process of how to fill out an absentee ballot. And many times with the language barriers, having to make sure that we were training our community power builders up with adequate language skills to do that. Not only that, though, we also knew that just API folks were not enough to win the state. We didn't have enough power. And so at Freedom Inc., because we are a Black Hmong Southeast Asian organization, we knew how important it was that we had to engage all of our communities to vote with each other in mind, and to make sure that we were engaging all communities. And so we, and with that, with all the anti-Asian incidences that we were seeing on Facebook, we were hearing from our communities, we also knew that we had to take a stand because folks were looking at us to see our response and how our stand and how we were going to support our communities through this. But we also understood that we, like there are bigger problems to this. There are bigger problems to this besides individual acts of hate, and to draw our communities, both the Black and the API communities, to look at, and especially the API communities, to look at the systematic oppression that was happening here, or the systematic racism that was actually happening here, that it wasn't an individual person or individual group of people, but we have the person sitting in the highest seat in this nation actually verbally calling this the Chinese virus, which was trickling down all of this that was happening within our communities, and helping folks divert that anger from an individual to a system. And how do we get them to now take that and act out and use their political power to change that? And so that we've been having to do a lot of those conversations within our communities. But even with all of that, we know that we have to plan for the future. And so if we can go, also one thing I wanted to touch on was we had to be able to work between our C3 and C4 to make sure that also all of our service providing organizations and all of our services were also providing political education all the time, and they were getting all the correct information. So while our domestic violence advocates were calling to check in on the victims and survivors that they were working on to make sure that they were okay, doing safety checks, they were also checking on making part of their safety plan to include voting. If you're going to go and vote, doing a safety plan around that. If you're not, would you like to get a ballot? Also having them, connecting them to see why, as a victim of violence, it is important for us to make sure that we're voting down the whole ballot. And educating our community on what all these different positions were and what kind of power these positions held, so that they were voting right. And so at Freedom Inc. and Freedom Action Now, we're actually not interested in reaching the most voters. We're interested in reaching and building socially conscious voters. We want voters to vote the right way. So we do want to reach the most voters that would vote the right way, and changing their minds and their hearts to see how they actually, how Black and Southeast Asian folks actually have been, like our lives have been political since the day that we entered this world. So going forward, there's many things that we still want to do. We're still gonna have to do voter education. We are teaching our communities how to get on Zoom, how to get on Facebook Live, so we can do this voter education with them. So we're still doing one-on-ones, teach them how to access technology so we can do voter education. One thing that we want to do is, we don't trust folks to make decisions for us anymore. If not us, who else? And many of the folks in our community over the past 3 years as Freedom Inc. has been doing civic engagement work, we've seen API individuals, Hmong individuals on local ballots every spring and have won every spring. and that we can't trust other folks to make decisions for us anymore. So we're starting to support and train new leaders for every level of government, elected or not. It doesn't do us any good if we get someone into, for example, it doesn't do us any good to get someone elected as mayor if we don't have folks that are trained to support this person and around these people. So we want to build a whole ecosystem and training leaders for all levels of that ecosystem. We are going to continue to do our census outreach. We understand that our communities that we work with, the LGBTQ community, Southeast Asian communities, and Black communities, are undercounted. We just led a Madison city-wide virtual party in the city of Madison with all of the other partners with the city of Madison around the census. We also want to continue doing voter registration. Sorry, I'm like talking so fast. Voter registration, continuing to do education on the absentee ballot and doing that early this time, teaching folks. And I think also importantly too, like we need to create new citizens, get folks naturalized and registered to vote right away, and educating them on this political system as they're learning they're learning for the naturalization test. But yeah, a lot to do. And last thing, we are preparing to think about what's going to happen after November 2020. Scenario thinking about what happens if the election doesn't go in our favor, or what does happen if this election goes in our favor, and planning beyond that and not waiting until the day after elections to really think about that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chai. Chai, Fabi, Dakota, Angela, thank you all so much for sharing your stories and sharing the work. And one thing I just want to uplift from all of this is that at a time where we are quarantined, physical distancing, it really is the trusted messengers, folks like all of these leaders and the organizations that they work for, that are going to be able to connect with communities and voters, because they have the relationships, because they're the trusted messengers to be able to talk about any number of things, but also the remaining elections that we have this year in Wisconsin. With that, I actually want to turn it over to Billy. I know we have some questions in the chat box. So yeah, let's, Billy, if you want to put the first question forward.
Yeah, I just want to pick up on basically repeat what you just said. I mean, first of all, this is just, I speak for all of us to say this has just been an incredible honor to hear you all talk about your work and everything you went through. And I had no idea that Freedom Inc. did all the things that you do, as long as I've known about you. So thank you all, four of you, so much, and all the other partners that we didn't have on the call. I think the big question on people's minds is like, all right, so what does the next 6 months look like? You guys were the canaries in the coal mine of a pandemic election, and now our whole country is going to go through some version of what you went through. So what are I'm sure you're still just recovering and taking care of your communities, but what are your early thoughts about what the next 6 months look like, and how you can prepare for all the scenarios, maximize what are the things you're going to do? What are the things you're still trying to figure out or struggling with? What are your dreams that if you had twice as much money or more, like you would do? And then I also want to, after we hear from you, I want to just make sure we hear from our Chicago team that worked so hard to organize Win the Midwest in the first place. That Jackie, Susan, Taquan, anyone from the Chicago team because building a local team in Chicago is a really important priority for us, in part because of how it can support the work in Wisconsin and Michigan. So I want to make sure we hear from y'all too. So do y'all just want to go around in the same order about how you're thinking about the future? Angela, Dakota, Fabian, and Chai?
Yeah, I think for us and the way we're thinking about this is we need to really restore confidence and faith in the electoral process. There's people on our staff who requested a ballot within the deadline and did everything right, and still to this day have not received her ballot. There is, 3 bins of ballots that never made it to their destination. And so I think people are agitated. People are putting together the pieces of how our elected leaders are working or not in our interest during this pandemic. And so I think that we need to make sure that we have systems in place, whether that's through litigation, being able to, advocate and, talk to election commission and talk to our local leaders. We need to have, I think we need to have a dialogue and a discussion of these are all the things that went wrong and how the systems, whether it was the postal system or the election commission, was overwhelmed due to the lack of leadership that we've had, and then a real plan to make sure that this doesn't happen for the August election and the November election. I think people need to have faith and confidence in that, and we need to make sure that people not only we're restoring people's faith and confidence, or there's an educational campaign to push forward what that looks like, so that there are very clear deadlines, they're not changing, and people know how they can fit in and plan accordingly. For us, we have 50 ambassadors who are set and ready to go to knock doors. And we had to turn them all, to digital space. And there is a little bit of a technological gap with folks. As others said, we had to teach people how to use Zoom and conference call lines and Hustle and virtual phone banks. And these are the same folks that, we have to show them how to turn the ringer off on their iPhone. Bless their heart, but like there is a technological gap. And a lot of times there's an information gap in our community. And so being able to be really intentional with leadership development, our original plans were to have 100 ambassadors by September to be out to disseminate information for the community. And we want to be able to continue that goal. We would love to be able to knock doors when it's safe, but even if it's not, it's still really important for us to continue to expand our team to make sure we're hitting as many people as possible, and that there's really no confusion and people feel that that their voice is counted and their ballots are counted, but we're also making sure that we're keeping people safe and we're holding leaders accountable to that as well.
Thank you, Angela. Woo.
So this is Jackie, and I just want to say this has been amazing. It would have been great to be with everybody in person. I'm looking forward to when we all get to be in person celebrating some incredible victories. We in Chicago and the Midwest have been particularly interested in hearing from people from Wisconsin. So thank you all for taking the time, more now than ever, to have 4 community leaders give us a briefing on what's been going on has meant a great deal to us. As Billy said, we are really interested in building, we believe, as Laura said at the beginning of this call, and I know that we only have a few minutes left, that we want to, that we believe a win can really run through the Midwest. And so in Chicago, we're trying to really build up people who are interested in Chicago and in the Midwest, build up a real team of folks. And I think that I was particularly inspired by 2 people who have become a huge part of our team, Saquon Lawrence and Susan Pritzker, one of whom is an expat, I guess we would call an ex-Chicagoan, but you never are really far from Chicago. Once you're from here, ask Billy. I don't know, Saquon, if you wanted to talk a little bit, and maybe Susan, you can close it out for us.
Yeah.
Cool. And I'll
Thank you.
Welcome. Thank you,
Billy.
Saquon and Susan. And then we'll come back to you all, Dakota, and the rest of the team to give their closing thoughts.
All right. Well, I'll be brief. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Good. Well, first of all, I want to thank you, Billy, and I want to thank Jackie and Susan. And I really want to thank Rima, Angela and Block, Dakota and Lit, Fabi and Voices de la Frontier of Action, and Chai and Freedom Inc. Because you all inspire us in Chicago. And this is why we're so interested in being engaged, is because of organizations and people like you. So the reason that a lot of us in Chicago want to be involved is because we see that we're embarking upon the most consequential election since 1864, right? When the country literally decided if it was even going to be a country or not. So this is absolutely critical for us to win. However, as you know, even though Lincoln prevailed, America has never lived up to its promise for people of color, women, and those at the bottom of the economic ladder, right? So we have to win this upcoming election. The current regime poses an existential threat to all of us. And so I know that there's tactical things that we want to support here in Chicago, things like voting by mail, e-voting. We're really interested in how you organize effectively in a virtual environment, and we want to support that. We want to create a donor infrastructure to support the work that you all are doing on the ground there, because we're going to win. Our state is not, we're not in a swing state. And so it's incumbent upon us to move our resources to where the action is. And that action is in Wisconsin, in Minnesota, and these other swing states, right? And so, you know, it's just really critical. And so for us, who come out of the, you know, the Black, you know, human rights and civil rights tradition, what's really critical for us after this, because we're going to come out on the other side of this stronger. But we have to create a message that talks about a society that's, and someone already alluded to this, that's characterized by a shared agenda, a shared understanding of the nature of the problem and what we do about it. Shared knowledge, right? Shared space and shared power for all of our people, right? And so our model that we look to are those voters in Wisconsin who stood in that line. That is our model. That's the bravery that I've not seen in a long time, not since the civil rights and human rights movement in the 50s and 60s. That's what that reminded me of. And so I am fired up. We are ready to go. You need to tell us specifically what you need. And we'll come out of this on the other side much stronger. We just have to keep pushing. So thank you all.
Thank you, Saquon. Susan, are you there?
Yeah, hi, Billy. Yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're supposed to be in person today.
I know. It's bittersweet, but I do appreciate the amazing organizing that you put into putting this program together on very short notice since you pivoted to Wisconsin. I'm both humbled and honored to be in the company of these fearless movement leaders we've heard from today. I can't say enough about how deeply touched and moved I am by the personal stories. And as a member of the MVP family for many years and a believer, a true believer and a member of the donor community, I just have one, well, actually I have 4 words to share with the friends and family and friends I haven't met yet who are on this call. And those 4 words are now more than ever. Seeing how, hearing and seeing from the stories of the folks on the phone about how their work just inevitably pivoted in this moment, not just to digital technologies and different kinds of organizing work, but to genuine relief work in their communities. The insulin story that Fabi told is a perfect example. So if anybody out there thinks that this politics is irrelevant or not important anymore, or somehow too distant from our immediate situation that we can afford to turn away from it, please reconsider. And if you can do more, please do. I'm going to say one more thing, which is I think MVP and many of its partner organizations have created an incredible ecosystem in this organizing space, this local group supporting those voices. But MVP's secret sauce is that if you as a donor want help figuring out what you should be doing, and how to proselytize your uncle who voted for the wrong person, or your cousins in Nebraska, or whoever it is, that help's available. And I raise my hand. I'll talk to anybody, anytime, about how important this work is. And lastly, just thank you, Billy and team and others. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you, Susan. We're actually like thinking like, damn, we should give Susan an award because you've been such an incredible partner. But so here's your award in virtual. But want to give the last minutes to Dakota, Fabi, and Chai. Yeah, about
yeah. So what the future looks like for us is holding and building that community that helps us still thrive, and taking care of our people first and foremost, especially young people of color who are just being ravaged by this virus. It also looks like doubling down on culture, and really being innovative in the ways in which we do outreach, and leaning into the Black and brown culture that has been able to allow us to get to this moment, and really allow us to be connected to each other at a different level than a normal vote out program does. It also looks like running a robust absentee ballot request program, as well as CHASE program for young people who are no longer going to be living on dorms if the virus takes us away from in-person work in fall, and making sure that we're touching all the young people within Wisconsin again, like we did in spring, and get that same victory that we got just a few days ago, again in fall. It also looks like us working with election officials in the areas in which we work, Green Bay, Oshkosh, Milwaukee, Stevens Point, Menominee, La Crosse, Eau Claire, to ensure that the mistakes that happened this time around in terms of young people and other people not getting their ballots do not happen again. And we make sure the absentee request process is as easy as possible for folks to do, and doing that accountability work with them. It also looks like us filling tech gaps for young people and making sure that they have the tools and everything else necessary to join us digitally moving forward. And then continuously expanding our statewide organizing. We have our Western Wisconsin organizer starting next month. We hope to have our Fox Valley organizer starting next month as well too, and really just making sure that we are doing the great work that we've done in Milwaukee for the last 2 years statewide, and get victories and win Wisconsin in November.
Thank you, Dakota. God. You're like so ingenious. Thank you for everything that you do. Fabi.
Thank you. So yeah, we're gonna keep surveying our people. What kind of needs they're going to be needing from moving forward until this virus goes down. But then we're jumping into we're doing census. We're actually launching our census campaign on Monday. After that, we're going to be focusing on electoral work until the end of November. What we originally had planned, so one of the challenges we had in this past election, because we not only did we had a transition, we have in our Voceros program, we have 800 leaders throughout the state with an 11,000. Right now, we're currently at 11,000 base. We want to get to 24,000, which was Trump's margin of victory. And what we want to do is, the original plan was to hire 50 super Voceros. These are folks who are going to be paid to help us activate the RVP. We also want to have up to 8 full-time organizers. And these organizers would be stationed essentially in the 5 key counties where we have 4 times the Latinx population. Those are some of the big things that we were originally planning for. But now we still need them, but to transition into phone banking style organizing. But also we would also like to have two more teams of phone bankers who are doing the cold calling and finding. In these past 3 weeks, we did a cold call in Milwaukee in Latinx neighborhoods or Latinx phone numbers. We were able to recruit 60 volunteers or voceros for our program. So we would love to continue doing that throughout the state on a statewide level. So I think those would be crucial. And then, I think just having long-term organizing and not just an election style organizing, and that long-term infrastructure, I think it's what's really key. And it's what Angela said in the very beginning, not being transactional, not just collecting data, but establishing long-term meaningful relationships throughout, within the community, and making, having long-term voters becoming part of the voter block. Identifying these voters, I think is crucial, and having people that look like us, activate the folks.
Yes. And Chai, let's give you the last word and then we'll close.
Hi, everyone. Thank you all for being on this call and listening to our stories. I think moving forward for Freedom Inc. and Freedom Action Now, we really have to uplift stories of folks in our community, and using these stories to remind us how we should vote in November. We want to find other ways, other non-traditional ways to reach voters. And that may be through engaging folks who aren't eligible to vote, engaging our refugee immigrant populations that wouldn't go to the polls, but how can we engage? Like, I think everyone can put a hand in what happens next fall, and teaching our folks and building our folks up to be able to do that regardless of what their status is. Also, we are looking to make sure that our cultural-based organizations throughout the state make it through this pandemic, that no one has to close their doors, because these are our trusted organizations in the communities. These are the folks who are on the ground every day, running around, making sure folks are fed so we can have conversations with them. And so making sure that when Freedom Inc. comes out at the end, that our other Black Hmong organizations in these smaller communities and these smaller organizations also come out at the end with us and survive that, so that our people can survive this. But yeah, there's so much to think about what we have to do. And so yeah, majorly uplifting our stories and really sharing that digitally, teaching our folks how to socialize on social media now and join us so that we can start doing some of our education and bringing our people together.
Thank you so much. I think our charge now, having heard you all, is how do we go and organize everyone we know the way you're organizing everyone you know in Wisconsin to support you? How do we help make sure that look what these groups have done on a shoestring. What if we could help them double or triple or quadruple their budgets? Like, oh my God, the change that could happen in Wisconsin, in the world, and the eyes of the world are on Wisconsin and on us. And it is our responsibility to get these terrible people out of decision-making for any of our lives. And this is our opportunity. I want to recruit, invite every single person to think about everything you can do and to connect with us, to connect with our partners and allies at Way to Win, at Solid Air, and all of the infrastructure organizing. We are all in this together. Go team. And we will be celebrating after November 3rd with all of you and with our heroes. We hope that you feel the love from all of us, and hopefully a lot of checks will be arriving in your mailboxes so you can make those hires you need to make to do the work you need to do. And we are all depending on you. And so we are going to rise to the challenge of being worthy partners so that you can depend on us to get you resources you need to do your incredible work. So thank you from all of us all over the country. We're sending you so much love and appreciation, and hopefully a lot of money to keep this work going. And I know everybody is going to have my back to make these words true. Thank you. Just huge thank you. And we are a team. We will make this happen. And thank you all for joining. We had 100 over 100 people until just 150 people until just now. And thank you all so, so much for being part of this. Go Wisconsin, Midwest forever. And together we'll win the Midwest.
The mid-best is what you mean. Thanks, everyone.
We'll see y'all.
Thank you so much, everybody. Very happy
Thanks.
to be here.
Thank you, Angela, Bobby, Dakota, Chai. Wow, look at all these beautiful faces. Bye.